Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we turn our attention now to the Labour Party, having had a couple of days of cataloguing and chronicling troubles for the Conservatives. Yesterday was a particularly problematic 24 hours, wasn't it, with ministerial resignations and, of course, the dreadful Grenfell Tower episode involving Jacob Rees-Mogg and then Andrew Bridgen, and the continuing questions surrounding this Russia report, which I am personally very interested in and will continue to be so. But Jeremy Corbyn woke up this morning, or was told last night, that he has lost his deputy. Just pause and think about that for a moment, if you would. The idea that the deputy leader of one of the two main parties has elected to resign mere weeks before a country-defining general election. Tom Watson claims that the decision has been taken for personal reasons, a claim that was endorsed by his friend Sadiq Khan on this programme. I'm not convinced. I don't know Tom Watson, oddly, even though we grew up on the same street in Kidderminster, which I've always been rather proud of. But I've met him once coming out of the studio here, and I don't buy that, I'm afraid. There's no way you resign for personal reasons with this timing. Phone lines are open, by the way, if Tom Watson wants to ring in. But I just can't quite buy that. Personal reasons in this fashion at this point in an election process? Everyone's entitled to their opinion, but for me, that looks political. It looks as though he has concluded that Jeremy Corbyn is not a man under whom he would want to serve as Prime Minister, or that Labour are doomed in the general election, or possibly 50% of one and 50% of the other. And then you have Ian Austin. Diane Abbott has weighed in on this to say 1 year as a junior minister at the Department for Communities and Local Government, says he won't vote Labour. Wall-to-wall coverage. Ken Clarke, 9 years as a Secretary of State, including Chancellor, says he won't vote for the Conservatives. Silence. And she questions the balance of election coverage. I don't think that's quite right from Diane Abbott. I think Ken Clarke has refused to rule out voting against the Conservatives, but he's waiting to see whether or not they do move further towards what he's described as a Brexit party agenda. So I'm open to correction on that, but I think Diane Abbott has possibly undermined what would have been a pertinent point by getting her facts a little wrong. And then you come to this question of extremes and the suggestion earlier this week that the Conservative Party was hemorrhaging so-called moderates. Tom Watson and Ian Austin, perhaps perceived similarly within the Labour movement, and they too have run for the hills. There are plenty left in the Labour Party, but one wonders whether Jeremy Corbyn's closest associates would complete that sentence for us by adding "for now." Because here's the weirdest thing, and it's weird for me as a commentator as well to properly identify this. Who will be cheering loudest at Tom Watson's departure from the Labour Party? Jeremy Corbyn's most ardent supporters, or his political opponents on the other side of the House of Commons? And that, I mean, for my money, I think the cheers will be equally loud. I don't know what that says about British politics, but it can't be good, can it? You know, look at the way Philip Hammond was being talked about yesterday by people who were his colleagues 2 months ago. Quite incredible. Maybe not 2 months ago, but not long ago. It's quite incredible to see this fracturing of the two main parties. And I'm conscious that we've spent a lot of time talking about the Tories' problems this week, so I want to talk a lot about the Labour Party's problems today, but I also want to bring in a question of whether or not these fractures are fatal. So I don't know how long it takes for these political cycles to play out, but if there's no room for Philip Hammond in the Conservative Party and no room for Tom Watson in the Labour Party, what does that say about the bigger political picture to you? I'm not quite sure what it says to me. I'm sorry, I'm not having one of those days where I'm just sort of expressing my confusion and discombobulation in the hope that you'll be able to fix it. I think it might be too early in some ways to plot this course, but I do want you to tell me whether or not you are troubled by, enthused by, or confused by the fact that there's no room for Tom Watson in the Labour Party, or my reading of the situation is he feels now that there's no room for him in the Labour Party, and Philip Hammond, who was Chancellor of the Exchequer at Christmas, feels that there's no room for him in the Conservative Party. Hit the numbers now, you will get through, I promise. 0345 606 0973. Actually, at risk of being a little bit like Toto in the final scenes of The Wizard of Oz, do not look at the old man behind the curtains. If you try, and a few people have been complaining lately after getting onto the programme that it's getting harder and harder to do so. This is, in all of our 15 hours together every week, this is by far the easiest moment to get through to the studio, because when we start the show with the Mayor of London or with a studio guest taking calls, it oddly just resets all of our internal clocks, and it means that as opposed to a normal 11 o'clock when I start a new subject or turn around the topic under discussion and things ignite immediately, this always moves a little slower. I don't know why, I'm just telling you as it is. So if you've been thinking of breaking your duck on LBC but been put off by whatever reason, now is a wonderful opportunity to slide seamlessly onto my switchboard. It's coming up to 10 to 11, and the questions I'd like you to answer, I'd like you to comment on Tom Watson's resignation. How big a disaster do you think that is for Labour? From where I'm sitting, it's very hard to spin it as a positive, up to and including the point where I acknowledge and explain to you many Jeremy Corbyn loyalists will be arguably more delighted by this development than Conservative politicians or Conservative supporters. I don't fully understand why, but hopefully by the time we call time on our conversation, we'll have a better, clearer picture of it. And I think there was a great piece, I can't remember who wrote it, it'll come to me, about how dangerous it is when a political party hemorrhages its moderates. Ed Vaizey left the Tories yesterday. Philip Hammond won't be standing. The list is long. The Labour Party isn't hemorrhaging moderates on that scale yet, but there were some suggestions last night that Tom Watson had tried to organise a sort of mass movement. There's a lot of criticism, of course, of the fact that he was widely seen as one of the people who stopped a proper split in the Labour Party when Change UK launched, when some Labour MPs decided that they could no longer serve under Jeremy Corbyn. Tom Watson was seen, rightly or wrongly, as some sort of adhesive for the more moderate members of the parliamentary party not to throw in the towel. He has now thrown in the towel himself. I wonder what you make of that. 0345 606 0973. It's 10:51. Steve is in Willesden. Steve, what do you reckon?
Hiya, James.
Hello, mate.
Well, I reckon we're going to have the lowest turnout in any election ever in this country.
Do you really?
Yes.
So for the record, Steve, for the record, so does Keith.
Yeah. 28% of the people didn't vote in the referendum.
Right.
You know, we usually round about 39%, I think it is, don't vote usually in a general election. I think we're looking probably at 52%.
Why is that? Why is that, Steve? Why do you think that?
Because we only have, according to the media, we only have two political parties in this country, which everybody knows is rubbish, but you need to give me something that's different from all the previous elections. If something unprecedented is going to happen in this one, there has to be something unprecedented in the explanation for that. And a media that slavishly reflects a two-party system. I don't fully agree with your analysis, but it's certainly not new. Right, it's a two-party system. We have a flawed media that nobody trusts.
So what's new
anymore? You know, we have Donald Trump. We have President Putin. We have so much interference. People are just going to say, it's not worth it. Let the Americans decide. Let the Russians, let the Chinese. You know, it's not down to us.
Okay.
It's a view. It's down to Facebook.
Okay. I mean, in terms of what influences votes, you make some pertinent points, and perhaps there is an answer to my slightly condescending question about what is different from in previous elections. But, of course, the problem perhaps with what you describe is the idea that the manipulation is designed to encourage people to vote in certain ways. So you're simultaneously claiming it's powerful, but also that it will fail to do what it is designed to do. Unless I've misunderstood you, in which case I apologise. Trevor is in Wembley. Trevor, what do you reckon?
Yeah, hi, James. Yeah, thanks for taking my call.
You're very welcome.
Yeah, as I said to your producer, obviously this has come as a big surprise because I thought that he was going to stick around, you know.
Yes.
Even though, personally, I don't think they got a chance in hell of winning the general election for obvious reasons, you know. And not necessarily just because of Jeremy Corbyn, but there's so many other things as well, but there isn't enough time to go into, you know, to great detail. But I kind of feel sad in a way because, you know, he was the deputy leader, is it?
Yes.
Is that right?
Well, yes. It's a shame we haven't got time to go into more detail.
You kind of expect him to be loyal and, you know, and support.
It's a terrible thing to happen, however you spin it. To lose your deputy in the kind of opening stages of an election campaign, the opening day, effectively, of an election campaign. Do you set much store by his claim that it's an entirely personal decision, motivated by his private life and changes that he's made in other areas of his existence, or do you think it is designed to damage Jeremy Corbyn?
I mean, you know, I'm prepared to give him the benefit of the doubt and say that yes. He did quit for personal reasons, but there's probably more to it than that. But you know, he's a politician, so you know, I think people expect.
I can't imagine anyone being more likely to vote for the Labour Party in the general election now that Tom Watson has quit. I don't know that it will necessarily lead to the loss of any votes. You'd have to tell me, but it might well do actually. But I can't see that it would lead to an increase in any votes. And that's what makes it politically, potentially, such a powerful intervention. 10:55 is the time, and I can't quite, unless someone gives me some really powerful arguments, I can't quite buy the idea that this has not been done with any sort of political intent at all. Sam is in Kenilworth. Sam, what would you like to say?
Hey, James. I would like to say that I think that there's going to be, like you say, the hemorrhaging of the both parties, the moderates, will open up a space where hopefully we could maybe look at a different voting system. So instead of having first past the post, having a representative ranked voting system I don't think that it would necessarily. I mean, we had the referendum and alternative voting, of course, which many people don't realise was presided over. The anti-AV campaign was presided over by a lot of the same people that presided over the pro-Brexit campaigns. Make of that what you will. But what is it about this hemorrhaging of moderates by both major parties that you think might increase the likelihood of another plebiscite on electoral reform? Because I think there's going to be more parties in play.
Do you really? I think John Curtis has suggested this. But there won't be more parties in play, will there? You just think the Liberal Democrats will do better than previously, and that the Brexit Party Limited might get a couple of seats or something? I don't know. I mean, there's not going to be more parties in play, but there might be a more diverse distribution of seats in Parliament. Yeah,
I think that we won't have a two-party system anymore.
But the two parties would have to vote for that. That's the point I'm trying to make somewhat clumsily. Why would they vote to abolish a system that affords them epic and largely unjust power?
Well, if we come to a point where it's just hung Parliament after hung Parliament because no party is big enough to gain a third majority, then it seems like it's the only logical system. Logic, obviously, these are not logical times in which we currently live. But you could also see a more European-style proliferation of coalition, couldn't you? You wouldn't actually need electoral reform. A recognition by the two main parties that to govern, they would need coalition, which oddly, of course, we should remind ourselves that the last three governments have benefited from coalition of sorts, whether it was with the Liberal Democrats under David Cameron or relying on DUP support in the House with Theresa May and latterly the early days of Boris Johnson's campaign. So you might not need electoral reform to bring about a different parliament, but obviously I can see why you link the two together. 10:57 is the time. This resignation by the deputy leader of the Labour Party, it's huge. I don't quite understand. Well, actually, what am I talking about? It is, of course, it's on all the front pages of the right-wing newspapers, but I do understand the problem I've got. I think, and call me and confirm or contradict, I think Jeremy Corbyn's most dedicated supporters, who of course not long ago were trying to get rid of Tom Watson. You remember at conference, John Landsman, who founded Momentum, was essentially trying to defenestrate Tom Watson.
they're going to be cheering as loudly as some Conservative politicians. Where does that leave the rest of us, especially those of us who already felt a bit homeless? Phoebe's in Walthamstow. Phoebe, what would you like to say?
Hi there.
Hello.
I just wanted to say that I think that it actually would change my vote.
But I'm going to predict in what direction, if you'll allow me.
Go on then.
It will make you less likely to vote Labour. Tom Watson quitting isn't going to make anybody more likely to vote Labour.
I don't think so. But my reasons would be that I would rather not vote Labour at the moment because of Jeremy Corbyn. Although, you know, for me, I would have continued to vote Labour in the hope that politics being what politics are at the moment, that possibly for a little bit further down the line there would be somebody a bit more moderate like Tom Watson to take over. And now what Tom Watson's done is left us with the prospect of Diane Abbott waiting in the wings, which is
she was already shadow Home Secretary. I'm always slightly uncomfortable with the scale and the tone of a lot of the criticism Diane Abbott receives. I'm not suggesting that you've fallen into any of those traps.
I don't even really. I've recently moved back here from abroad. I don't even know that much about the woman.
And yet here you are reaching for
people.
Yeah, well, that's kind of the point I'm making. No, that's the point I'm making. You don't know anything about her, but she's the first name you reach for when you're coming up with reasons to be spooked by the Labour. It's almost as if somebody's mission has been accomplished with you.
Well, not with me personally, but it's also
with you personally. I mean, literally, you just said on the radio, I don't know anything about her, but she's the first name I would mention if I was looking for reasons not to vote Labour. I don't necessarily disagree with you or agree with you, but it's a very honest and I suspect a regrettable admission that the first politician you chose to mention in a negative light is one about whom you don't know anything. 11 o'clock is the time. A very good morning indeed to you. As things stand, we are intending to get stuck into Mystery Hour at 12, although the current political merry-go-round being what it is, who knows? It could be resignations like buses, aren't there? You wait ages for one to come along, and then there's two in the space of a couple of hours within the context of the Labour Party. Conservative MPs announcing that they won't be standing again continue. That must now, I don't even know. We shall summon Theo Usherwood shortly and find out from him. One of the questions I forgot to ask him is the point at which there won't be any more resignations. I would have cautiously suggested that when campaigning started, that meant that the team had been assembled. But we are where we are, so watch this space. Oh, and I forgot yesterday to tell you a story about Jeremy Corbyn's new habit of taking multiple questions at the end of his speeches and having an advisor on the stage with him to sort of MC events. He went for 4 yesterday. Previously, and I've done this myself because it allows more people to get involved, you do it in 3. So you take 3 questions from a room and answer them all in succession, and then you take 3 more. He took 4. Now, there may be perfectly positive reasons for doing that. As I mentioned, it does allow you to avoid... when you do public meetings, or you do a speech to people, or you're interviewed on stage and there are questions at the end, if you've never attended something like that, let me warn you in advance about the giveaway, the telltale sign that Mr. Dull from Dullsville has got to his feet. Somebody will always say, this isn't really a question, it's more of a statement. And it happens a bit with the phone-ins to Sadiq Khan, actually, because we put people through. It's a live programme. There's no guarantee that what they've said to the producer is what they will say when they get on air. And sometimes you can spot these people who've told us they're going to ask a question, but actually they want to make a little speech of their own, which is not what people have paid 20 quid a pop to come and listen to a public meeting. So one way that you deal with that is to take the questions in 3s, which means if someone gets to their feet and says, this isn't really a question, it's more of a statement, you can say, well, we're only taking questions at the moment, so sit the flip down and move along. So it works in some contexts. For a major politician, a senior politician, to be doing it to the press, that's for my money at least, that's a slightly different proposition. But here is an interesting story for involving a politician very much from the same wing of the Labour Party as Jeremy Corbyn. Tony Benn, Anthony Wedgwood Benn. And I attended in the early days of the build-up to the Iraq War, when, like most of the country, I was on the wrong side of history. And Tony Benn was categorically on the right side, as it turned out. Although I still need a little bit of persuading as to why and how leaving Saddam Hussein in power in Iraq would have been a good idea. It's very, very hard to imagine things turning out worse with him still there as they did with him removed. But that's a conversation for a different day. So I went along to a Stop the War Coalition meeting, and it was interesting. The crossover between Stop the War and Socialist Worker was huge, which I hadn't clocked before. I say that solely because of the branding and the posters and the merchandise on sale in a little meeting hall in Kensal Rise in West London, actually. Just down by the Grand Union Canal, for those of you who are... It's not Kensal Rise, really, is it? More Westbourne Park, but I digress. Anyway, Tony Benn was there. I was quite excited. I haven't been doing this job for that long. And, in fact, yeah, I think I was doing this job, but I thought I'll go along. Public meetings are quite exciting. And something really weird happened. I really liked Tony Benn's reputation, although, like a lot of people, I didn't know that much about him. I just always thought he was someone who didn't seem to be frightened of anyone, or he seemed to be an enemy of deference. I could be wrong, but I thought I'd go along. So I went along, and it was a fairly partisan crowd. The crowd was already fairly well convinced that military action against Saddam Hussein would be the wrong thing for the United Kingdom to participate in. And at the end of this evening, they did what Jeremy Corbyn now does at press conferences or at public meetings. They took questions in groups. I don't think this will be a coincidence. I don't. I mean, if you can prove to me that it is, mea culpa. But I don't think this is a coincidence. I think Jeremy Corbyn learnt from Tony Benn this tactic. And what I learned that night was a rather negative side to it, which is this. I asked a question that night. So did a bloke from Iraq. They took questions, I think, in fives that night. And when they came to our questions, they just completely ignored them. So he was calling for a people's parliament, which would be more representative than a politician's parliament. It's funny how the songs never change. It's just the singers that change, isn't it? And so my question, somewhat predictably, was, would you ensure that people in favour of going to war in Iraq are in your people's parliament, or would it be confined exclusively to people who already agree with your position? And he then took a call from a chap who described himself as probably the only Iraqi in the room, who made an impassioned plea for intervention, and I think described the plight of the Kurds. It's a long time ago. But he was the only other dissenting voice in the room. And when it came to the time at which the panel would answer the 5 questions that had been posed by the floor, they answered the 3 that had been asked by other members of the audience and just completely ignored me and the Iraqi fella. I mean, completely. It was as if we had never asked our questions at all. And then they moved on to the next bunch of 5. Look, I'm a slightly obnoxious individual, I grant you, but I'm not obnoxious. You don't have to nod quite that vigorously, but I'm not obnoxious enough to start hollering, and maybe I would be now. Depends who's on the stage. I just sort of sat there in a kind of stunned silence. But that's so obvious what they've just done. They've excised me like Trotsky from photographs of post-revolutionary Russia. They've just removed me from history. And I don't know, but I do think that if you ask Jeremy Corbyn who his favourite British Prime Minister of his lifetime, British politician of his lifetime was, he'd probably say Tony Benn. And there they are doing exactly the same thing. Whether or not it would have such a crass outcome, I doubt. But it does. It just somehow allows you to control the media, which always worries me slightly. Anyway, we digress enormously. I hope you enjoyed that little vignette into political meetings and the strange tactics and manipulations that can be involved in the Q&A process at the end. 11:11 is the time. Back to Tom Watson's resignation, which I think is huge and incredibly damaging for Labour's election hopes, up until the point, you remember, that Jeremy Corbyn's closest fans are probably cheering, I'm going to go with more loudly than Conservatives today. That's the bit I don't quite get. But if you do, you know what to do. 0345 6060 973. Andrew's in Chiswick. Andrew, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
I disagree with you a little bit.
That's
I think
all right. That's allowed.
Thank you for that. I think that you're overrating Tom Watson. I'm not a friend of Corbyn. I'm more to the right in the Labour Party. I'm a Labour fan, more to probably the right of the Labour Party. I think if it was Keir Starmer, I think it would be more of a problem.
Yeah.
But what I don't understand with Tom Watson is why he's going now. Because I think the thing is, if Corbyn loses, and the best he can hope for maybe is to form a government with another party.
Yeah.
If he loses, he's done. He's finished.
Yeah.
So why would you go when you've got a chance?
That's evidence for the defence. Then that makes it more likely that he is telling the truth when he says it's not political. He genuinely has had enough.
And also, what I would also say is that I think that he's obviously been involved in this case against politicians and paedophilia.
Yes.
That maybe there's other stuff yet to come out over that, and maybe he's facing stuff that he feels that he needs to be away from the public eye from. I don't know.
I think that's unlikely. Nothing's impossible, and there are certainly calls for more inquiries into the Carl Beach affair. And he continues to. I mean, he stood up in Parliament and said things about Leon Britton that, in retrospect, that are almost unbelievable. But it's 900-odd pages, Richard Enriquez's report. If there's anything more to come out, I'd personally be staggered. I saw Andrew Neil suggesting on Twitter that his unwillingness to answer questions about that episode might have explained his decision to quit the field. But I mean, another interesting intervention from the scrupulously impartial BBC presenter. But I can't quite see that myself, because the timing wouldn't make sense. If that was a reason to quit the field, why quit the field at what is potentially the most damaging time for Labour's election prospects?
Because he doesn't want to stand for another 5 years.
Yeah, that's what I mean. If he's trying to duck accountability or avoid questioning, then he hasn't done a very good job of it. He's taken all the flack and then he's walked the plank. So I don't know. But as I said at the outset, all answers to these questions are welcome. I'm Incorrigible is characteristically convinced of his correctness. I doubt that Tom Watson has done anything in the last 20 years that wasn't overtly political. However, if he wanted to leave Parliament, then when exactly would have been a good time? He has chosen the least politically damaging time, not the most damaging. It's an interesting analysis. Parliament only closed, and Tom Watson only ceased being an MP at midnight on Tuesday. He resigned and stood down on Wednesday. If he wanted to cause damage to Labour, he would have waited until closer to polling day. I can't argue with the second bit of that, but I don't know that the first bit necessarily removes the observation that he's done harm. It's 11:15. I've got some phone lines now. 0345 60 60973. What's the line in The Importance of Being Earnest, when Ernest tells... what's her name? Lady Bracknell, that both his parents are dead, and she says something like, to lose one parent is unfortunate, to lose two looks like carelessness. You could kind of say that with Jeremy Corbyn and former Labour MPs, or Labour MPs formerly loyal to Gordon Brown, although Ian Austin, of course, hasn't been a Labour MP for some time. To lose one lieutenant is unfortunate, to lose two looks like carelessness. It's 11:15. For the avoidance of doubt, I think it's well dodgy for Jeremy Corbyn to take his questions in groups when he does public appearances. But in the great annals of dodginess, having a report from your Security and Intelligence Committee into Russian infiltration of British politics and refusing to publish it in the run-up to an election, despite calls to do so from former Attorney Generals, heads of security services, senior ambassadors, diplomats. I mean, I'll leave you to decide what's dodgier. But again, it's one of those elections where those of us who are keen to point out the flaws and foibles of everybody involved are going to be quite quiet voices. You just have a look at today's front pages, where the Daily Mail, this early, even with a post-Paul Dacre editor in place, it somehow saw evidence yesterday that justifies comparing to Boris Johnson to Winston Churchill on the front page today. I don't know quite what to make of that. Quite incredible, really. Of course, I well remember the day during Winston Churchill's wartime premiership where one minister had to resign over his problems with a former aide sabotaging a rape trial. I well remember the time that Winston Churchill's cabinet secretary insulted the memory of people who died in an appalling tragedy. Where on earth was the evidence for the Churchillian parallels. And if you've pulled them out of the bag already, what the hell do you reach for next? Who are you going to compare him to tomorrow? Terry Wogan? Or Jesus himself? I do not know. 20 minutes after 11 is the time. OK, I'll say it then. I sense from you that Tom Watson's resignation as deputy leader of the Labour Party isn't a very big deal at all. I mean, there was one lady, of course, who is less likely to vote Labour now, but it turned out that she was possessed of a very negative view of Diane Abbott, but didn't really know why, except people had told her that Diane Abbott wasn't someone to be admired. Everyone has a vote. Of course, her vote's worth as much as yours. Is that a fair comment? I never know how to do this. I say, give me a ring and tell me that you don't care about something. I just can't help wondering whether the story is a little less impactful than maybe I've fallen into the trap of taking my lead from the right-wing newspapers. Watson quits Commons, says the Telegraph. Watson quits as deputy as Corbyn strengthens grip, says The Guardian, which now, in retrospect, is possibly the most perspicacious of the front-page headlines. The Mirror's leading on a sort of Northern Powerhouse follow-up that Labour is due to pledge today. We'll catch up with Theo later. And the Tom Watson story also on the front of the Times, although I've torn the front page off, so I can't tell you for sure what the actual headline was. So professional. Is it a big deal? There you go. I rarely ask that question, but the rules are always different during election periods. I would have thought, at any other point in British political history, if the deputy leader of a major party unexpectedly announced his resignation on the first day of the election campaign, it would be stop the presses. So far, and my switchboard is not scientific, you barely batted an eyelid. 0345 606 0973. Dave's in Lee, near Wigan. Are you batting your eyelids today, Dave, or have you just got something in your eye?
Batting my eyelids a little bit. Morning, James.
Hello,
on the first-time call, so please go easy on me.
Oh, well, we'll see.
I think it is a big deal to people that aren't very well informed, if you're allowed to say that, right?
Well, this is going to be a rare moment where I'm the second most condescending person in this conversation.
Well, everyone's vote's worth the same, isn't it? And if you're not very well informed, you don't follow the politics inside out like some of us do, and you don't know the kind of dynamics between Watson and the Labour Party currently, then the headline deputy leaders resign from the Labour Party is a big deal just on the surface. But when you look at it, he wasn't a very helpful member of the Labour Party of late. He obviously criticised Corbyn quite openly.
Especially over the failure to adopt an unequivocal Remain stance. So in many ways, I don't think you are being condescending, because Watson quits as deputy, which is pretty much the headline on the front of the Times.
Like a big thing, doesn't
until you do what the Guardian did and add as Corbyn strengthens grip, and then it becomes an entirely different story.
But I wanted to talk about something a little bit different, and I don't know if it's going to kind of raise a few eyebrows.
Go on.
It just seems all a little bit too calculated. You see Watson resign and Austin resign, and if you have a look a bit deeper, these are all friends, part of the Labour Friends of Israel, which is absolutely fine. You can be part of whatever you want to be part of, but obviously Corbyn has an opposite viewpoint, and he's quite in favour of Palestinian rights, and as well as recognising issues in Israel, he's quite in favour of Palestinian rights.
Ian Austin has been very clear. It's why he left the party. I mean, he was adopted by Jewish parents, and he feels that the anti-Semitism displayed by some supporters of Jeremy Corbyn is utterly intolerable, and therefore he refused to continue tolerating it. I'd have thought the parallel, if you were going to draw a parallel between the two, it would be more to do with Gordon Brown and Labour Friends of Israel, wouldn't it? They're both from that wing of the party. I mean, Chris Williamson's resignation letter is...
What's Gordon Brown got to do with it now? Right now, Austin's come out quite unequivocally and told everybody that...
To vote Conservative.
He can't vote, and that's what really strikes me as it being slightly calculated. Yes, Corbyn does have a slightly different view on the Israel-Palestine conflict. And I think that is the only thing, really, that tangibly you can even say that makes him anywhere near the realms, although I completely disagree, of some sort of anti-Semitism. Just the fact that he wants to support the rights of Palestinian people.
No, but that's not it, is it? I mean, you don't help the cause when you do this, my friend, because...
Go on, explain.
Well, I have done so many times, but we're now talking about Jeremy Corbyn. You're denying anti-Semitism.
I'm not, no, I'm not denying it. I believe it exists, but what I'm saying is, I don't believe Jeremy Corbyn is anti-Semitic. He's got a view about a conflict that's going on in the world where both sides...
Why did he like that Facebook picture of the Jewish men holding up the world's economy?
Do you think he's physically on Facebook all the time, or do you think it's one of them mistakes where somebody who's managing his...
Have you ever done that? Have you ever accidentally liked a heinously anti-Semitic image?
Not necessarily anti-Semitic. But this is another point as well where I'm from.
Dave, this is what I mean. This is what I mean about you not doing anyone any favours.
Go on, explain that.
I already have, and you've said, he just accidentally liked a massively anti-Semitic Facebook post.
I don't know, but what I'm saying...
No, but here you are. This is what people are hearing. Jeremy Corbyn's anti-Semitic. What about that time he liked the really anti-Semitic picture? What about that time he's sort of invited people into the House of Commons with extremely pungent views about the Holocaust? And, it was just an accident. Or maybe he was just there for dinner. That's what people are hearing.
Again, I know
you don't, and there's nothing I can say that's going to get through. There's nothing I can say that's going to get through your skull, mate. I can tell that now, but I'm just telling you how it sounds.
I understand that. That's why people don't typically want to tackle the issue, because it does sound a particular way.
People don't want to tackle the issue, mate. They've not been talking about anything else for the last 5 years.
No, I mean, people don't want to put the opposite point of view across.
There is no opposite point of view, except to sound ridiculous by saying, I think he accidentally liked a massively anti-Semitic picture.
No, I didn't say that.
Yes, you did.
Well, what I'm saying is, for certain it was Jeremy Corbyn on his laptop that pressed like.
Well, why would he apologise if it wasn't?
Because that's politics, you have to.
I see. Yeah, and you don't think this sounds like you're making a free pass? And I don't think he's anti-Semitic. What about that massively anti-Semitic thing he did? I don't think that was him.
No, what I'm saying is,
I know what you're saying, Dave. I've heard it all before. It's you that needs to pay more attention to what you're saying. Lonnie's in Oxford. Lonnie, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. I'm going to say it again, first-time caller, so go easy.
Go on.
I
don't think it works. I don't think it works. That I might just think for 30 seconds. I'm all right then, but then I feel. I'll tell you what, Lonnie. You'll have plenty of time to make your point. I promise. But I got a text halfway through the programme yesterday from the doctors telling me that I have I'm due for a blood pressure test, and I looked at it twice. I thought, I wonder if they're listening, and I realised it was a robot. It was a pre-programmed reminder. But anyway, carry on.
Well, I think Tom Watson just realised he's had his moments in the sunshine, and as the Labour Party disagreements settled down bit by bit, not so open, not so aggressive, people started settling their minds on, look, we're going for an election, let's get this sorted out. Tom Watson realised he's not going to get rid of Jeremy Corbyn, and he's not going to get the leadership.
But he should still want to be. He should still want to be part of a Labour government. I mean, no.
Yeah, no. Yes, he should want to. He should still want to. But of course, that's when you get down into people's deepest, darkest feelings. What are you doing it for? And Tom Watson realised he's not going to get what he wants. He wanted that leadership.
I don't. Maybe. I mean, I don't know.
He thought he was going to back Jeremy Corbyn off into the long grass. He got himself match fit. He lost all that weight. He thought he was going to be schmoozing the political hierarchy, and it didn't happen.
Yeah, maybe.
The people didn't see him as a leader.
But he didn't do
the membership of the party.
No, it's a good point. He feels his political career has run its course in a parliamentary context, and he wants to move on to pastures new. I think that if I was to offer full-throated support for your theory, I would feel a little bit puzzled about why he didn't move sooner. I mean, there have been opportunities to...
He was hoping that Jeremy Corbyn would get more grief over the anti-Semitism. I mean, even the...
He was hoping a vacancy would arise, perhaps.
Yes, and it would fall into his lap because of course, look, I can see the awkwardness of Jeremy Corbyn, but I can see the awkwardness of him as well. I can see Tom's got a bit. He's got a bit of a funny, slightly stunted speaking style. So
hang on a minute. That's the Hurcott Road. That's the Hurcott Road twang. That is, Lonnie. That's the Kidderminster patois. How dare you criticise Tom Watson's speaking style? I know what you mean. There's a shortage of what you might call the really complete politicians in the current climate. Speaking of which, and I'm moving on just because of the news, but a couple of texts just to make you laugh, if indeed you're still capable of laughing. Here's someone called Scott. Now, there's a surprise. At Mr. James O.P. playing down the importance of Tom Watson resigning. Mr. Lefty showing his standard colours. Labour has lost one of its main moderate centre MPs. That's big and also sad news. And someone listening to exactly the same radio programme has texted to say, typical at Mr. James O.B. using Tom Watson's resignation to attack Corbyn. There you go, lads. I wish you could just talk to each other and leave me out of it. He didn't like an anti-Semitic mural on Facebook. He asked why it was being removed. This must be libel. If it's worse than liking it. If you ask why something anti-Semitic is being removed, I don't. There are days when I don't know why I bother, and I suspect there's going to be quite a few of them between now and December the 12th. But listen to this. I think you're right, James. Tom Watson stepping aside isn't really a big thing. Ian Austin's open endorsement of the Tories, a party he's campaigned against his entire life, is a much bigger and more damaging story. Not just potentially damaging to Labour, and then some constituency-specific observations that I'm nervous about repeating during this period of purdah. It will be one of the most negatively affected post-Brexit Johnson government. I cannot believe Austin has encouraged what he has. Dear Mr. O'Brien, after gathering... you can call me James. After gathering the thoughts of your show and reviewing my own, I don't think the Tom Watson resignation is as big of a deal as perhaps we all thought at first. I haven't seen him mentioned since the Labour conference. It's very much been Corbyn's show. I also believe that Labour houses more moderates than the Tories. You only have to look back to the PM's own brother resigning for evidence of this. It's worth adding that I'm not a Labour voter, so I could, of course, be chatting complete rubbish. You and me both, Sam, in Dorset. 11:36 is the time. You would... I think The Guardian get it right today. I think the way the media works, you know this, I've told you, goodness knows I've told you a bazillion times, but the way the right-wing media works is not entirely honest. When the Daily Mail today suggests that Boris Johnson is channeling Winston Churchill, it's possible that they may be exaggerating slightly. And in a similar vein, the resignation of Tom Watson, I certainly came on air this morning thinking it was a really big deal. Indeed, many Jeremy Corbyn fans confidently predicted that I would use it as a stick with which to beat the dear leader. And some of them, despite the fact that I've done the exact opposite, are still adamant that I am using it as a stick with which to beat the dear leader. But there we are. Definitely nothing cultish about that, just so that we're clear. But in fact, and oddly, I should check with him whether I'm allowed to do this, actually. But I've had all right, I won't give too much away. I've had a text off another phone-in host who was on air pretty much when this story broke. And she tells me that they had exactly the same experience. People were engaged and interested, but there was not a widespread sense that anybody thought this was a particularly big deal. I'll tell you why I thought it was, and I am still persuadable that it is. I think people considering a vote for their Labour candidate in their own constituencies who don't share many people's enthusiasm for Jeremy Corbyn personally, but are actually comfortable with much of the policy platform, and who are troubled by the dark shadow of anti-Semitism that has been allowed to inveigle its way into parts of the party under Jeremy Corbyn's leadership. I think they feel that these so-called moderates, the Starmers, the Coopers, would you call Jess Phillips a moderate? I don't know. Anyway, the people who don't seem to have fallen under Jeremy Corbyn's spell are now described as moderates. For people considering voting Labour with reservations, I considered Tom Watson to be one of the reservation solvers. Does that make sense? The people who would give them a grounds for voting with reservations rather than letting those reservations redirect their vote. But actually, now that I've just listed a few of the other key players in the Labour Party at the moment, I wonder whether he was even at the top of that list. I don't know. 11:39 is the time. 0345 6060 973 is the number. And just so you know, lots of texts coming in claiming that mural where 2 of 6 men sitting around a table running the world were clearly Jewish and portrayed in stereotypical Jewish, anti-Semitic, almost Nazi fashion. Lots of text coming in claiming that it wasn't anti-Semitic at all. And that is actually, I mean, I sound a little bit glib and dismissive, but there it is in a nutshell, the Labour Party's problem. That's not anti-Semitic because it's true. OK, you crack on. Keith's in Teesside. Keith, what would you like to say?
Well, I'd like to say, James, and thank you for having me on. It's a first-time caller, and I've listened to you for some considerable time.
Good.
I think it's serious, but it's not terminal.
Go on.
And I think what we should remember is that these sort of things happen pretty much in every election. Somebody senior does stand down, somebody turns against their own party, starts making statements. I mean, you can look at local level, you can look at national level. People will know through their local news media. This happens continuously. Often people have grievances. In terms of Tom, I don't think he has any deep grievances. I would have thought that he's decided it is the best time for him to go.
Yeah.
And I think we all get into that situation from time to time. I was a local politician for a number of years. I decided at a particular point that I would stand down. No other reason than I thought it was best for me, best for my family, best for my career. How did you long to be there?
No, I completely understand. Sometimes the simplest, least provocative answer is the correct one, isn't it? We're possibly all a little bit in danger sometimes of looking for bonfires and conspiracies and hidden agendas where there actually aren't any. But the timing is interesting, isn't it? Or is it's actually just inevitable? If you're not going to fight the next election, you step down when Parliament has dissolved.
I think in that sense, you're absolutely right. I mean, actually deciding to time it, there never is a good time.
No, but Owen Smith announced...
stand down. It wouldn't matter. If you stood down on Christmas Day, if you stood down on New Year's Day, if you stood down when England were playing important football, it doesn't matter when it is. It won't look good. There's nothing wrong with the media, as far as I'm concerned, reporting it the way that they have done. That is absolutely legitimate for you, legitimate for anybody else to raise it. I think they're absolutely right to do that. I think where the problems occur are when people, and you've done it, I'm not criticising you for doing it, but you're looking for reasons why. You've raised the anti-Semitism issue, which as a Labour Party member, I've got to tell you, is absolutely disgraceful. I would get rid of those people immediately, I really would. The party's got to be stronger. I'm not a Corbyn supporter. I didn't vote for him. I wouldn't vote for him as the leader. But if I tell you that I've only ever voted for one person that has ended up being the Labour Party leader in the 40 years I've been a member.
Really?
That happens. That happens. You know, you don't always get the person that you want, but I am absolutely 100% Labour. I will be voting Labour in this election like I've done in every other. And you mentioned Churchill at the beginning when he was the piece about Johnson. Of course, Churchill said many things. One of the things he said was, elect Clement Attlee, you'll get the Gestapo. Now, I would have thought and would have hoped, and I was a politics lecturer for a number of years.
I was about to suggest that.
Would have moved on.
Yes.
The people would not make those sorts of comments.
Oh, but it works, Keith. It works, Keith.
Let's say I've heard some people on your radio station comparing the Labour Party with Hitler. National socialism.
You've also overlooked... Hey, hang on a minute. You're not lecturing now, OK? I've got my hand up in the lecture theatre. You've glossed over. You've glossed over a Nyrin Bevan. You've glossed over... Hang on, sit down! You've glossed over a Nyrin Bevan describing Tories as vermin. So let's not pretend that this is all one-sided.
No, it isn't all one-sided.
Good.
I'll be the first to admit that.
Well, you weren't. You're the
second.
The political
discourse should have, I would have thought and would have hoped, certainly would have through my political career, I would have hoped that it would have moved on. There is no room for that sort of language. I mean, you've referenced yourself many times our newspapers.
Yes.
The least trusted newspapers in the Western world. What's wrong with it? What is wrong with it?
Yes.
That's the problem.
Well, I agree with that.
I'm a Party member.
Yes.
I was being an election agent, and if I tell you in elections, I would speak to the Tory agent every day. Every single day. We got on like a house on fire. But she would say to me, this shouldn't happen, and we would agree. I can't imagine that would happen now. And that saddens me. That really, really, really saddens me. What sort of country we're going to be, I don't know. I don't blame you. I don't blame any commentator that's on there. You have to live with what we've got.
Yes.
Somebody, maybe I,
yes.
I will take blame.
Go on.
I've been a politician. Yeah. I've been there. I've done it. And I'd like to say to you, and say to anybody, I am part of the problem. Because what have I done over the last 30 or 40 years to improve it? Arguably, I didn't do enough.
What could you have done? You see, as a journalist...
I never did enough.
Well, you could say that, and I admire your humility and your honesty. I am neither humble nor... Well, I'm honest, I hope, but I'm certainly not humble. I tell you now, if you go after the right-wing media, if you go after the barons, the owners, the editors, you go... The sheer scale, I'm not going to be able to tell half of the stories that I've been exposed to since I started doing it until I retire from this job. And by then, no one will be interested in my memoirs. But you... And Tom Watson knows more about this than I do. You upset that lot. You have a target on your back, the likes of which you cannot even contemplate until it's there. So that's part of the problem, and that's not politicians. That's big business.
No, it is part of the problem, but in the same way, in one way or another, it's being created. You could say, or I could say, that those sort of people, whoever those sort of people are being allowed to creep into our political discourse. Yes. I've got Tom's book in front of me, the one that you were referring to, Dial M for Murdoch.
Yes.
Brilliant read. Absolutely superb read. How many people listening to this have ever read it? Very, very few. And that's another part of the problem, isn't it? The sort of issues that you and I and many people on your radio station talk about day in, day out, never reach out to anybody other than that small few.
And then their Facebook feed fills up with carefully, shall we say, curated stories, many of which won't be true, and they do a million times more impact than even perhaps reading that book would have done. Keith, you've taken me up to the break almost perfectly. Many thanks indeed. Thank you for your patience as well with my slightly childish behaviour, although I did feel I was getting lectured at one point. I look forward to the next one, Keith. They're 10 minutes to 12. I've got quite a, as you know, mischievous mind, but sometimes things tickle me and I don't know why. So Stephen has tweeted me, and it's intended for me, because it's got the words ahead of the address. I've got no idea what you're replying to, mate. Stephen's tweeted, "My money is on Johnny Vaughan." What could I possibly have said since 10 o'clock this morning that invites "my money is on Johnny Vaughan" as a response? I've got nothing. How bizarre. Anyway, shall we summon the Usherwood? Oh, go on then. Summon! So I'd like to dedicate this summon to the former Speaker, John Bercow. Summon the Usherwood! Blimey, that was quick.
Very quick. I had a feeling, my antennae were out, and I thought that you might summon me to bring you an update from John McDonnell's speech and from Sajid Javid's speech today. Is Finance Day, and it's been all about borrowing, differing rules on how to borrow, whether it's for an investment or for expenditure. John McDonnell setting out Labour's new rule, which is to separate borrowing from investment from borrowing for day-to-day expenditure. So they're now going to be separated out. So if the government is going to borrow, say, to build a new hospital or to build a school or to build roads, that's not going to go into the figures for general borrowing.
And I can tell you that our fiscal rule for the next Parliament will exclude borrowing for investment for borrowing targets. It will mandate us to deliver an improvement in the overall balance sheet by the end of the Parliament, so that when we invest in the infrastructure our country desperately needs, it's recognised on both as a cost but also as a benefit. And yes, adding to the government's debt, but also adding to the government's assets and strengthening our public sector to deal with the future.
Sounds a bit frail.
I think he had a frog in his throat. He was finding it difficult.
Occupational hazard.
Yeah. If you're giving a speech, it's probably not best during an election. Meanwhile...
you just reminded me, this is the time of year where I normally start wearing a scarf in the studio. Sorry, carry on.
Sajid Javid, of course, was making the case for the Conservatives. They're going to have to borrow around £7 billion more in order to pay for the police officers that they want to recruit and for the 40 new hospitals that are actually 6 hospitals.
So today, I'm announcing new fiscal rules that, if elected, will allow us to take advantage of the opportunity to invest in our future and our public services, but without squandering the hard work of the British people. Now, like anyone who budgets, whether it's in a household, a small business, a large business, I know that we must keep track of what we're spending and what we bring in. We can't run an overdraft forever on a day-to-day spending. So I can confirm that our first rule will be to have a balanced current budget. What we spend cannot exceed what we bring in.
Now, if they are going to deliver, the Conservatives, on that promise for new hospitals and for 20,000 new police officers, there are going to have to be cuts with that spending rule elsewhere within the budget. And that's going to be a question that continues to be asked right from now until, well, I'd hope it would be asked until the general election, because you cannot spend £7 billion more without borrowing more and at the same time promise tax cuts. It's just an impossibility.
Well, you can do it. You can promise it. You can't deliver it.
No.
Welcome to politics.
Meanwhile, we have a Remain alliance.
Now, this is quite interesting.
This is interesting. It is interesting.
I'm not suggesting for a minute that your previous analysis wasn't absolutely riveting, Theo, but...
Call Theo, I should say. Call me down to the studio. Like, I'm just going to come and talk about... boring.
Carry on.
So, right, I'm going to bring you this really boring report about the Remain alliance. It's going to be dull as dishwasher. I'm going to try and make it as really uninteresting as possible, because that is my aim. So, basically, what's happened is the Remain alliance of the Plaid Cymru, the Liberal Democrats and the Green Party got together, and they've worked out which seats they're going to stand. If I could just, to give you the context of this, when the Remain parties, which are staunchly for Remain, haven't got together, they've found themselves to have done not necessarily as well as they could have done if they could have come to some sort of agreement. The obvious example was Wales during the European elections, whereby and it is an extrapolation of the figures, so people can make counter arguments to this, but this is the broad argument. If you added together the Brexit the Green Party, Plaid Cymru and the Liberal Democrats, they came out with 40% vote share in Wales, and then the Brexit Party came out with a 32% vote share in Wales. The Brexit Party got 2 of the 4 MEPs. And so the argument was, well, hang on a moment, if either the Liberal Democrats, the Greens had stood aside to make way for Plaid, or Liberal Democrats had managed to say, right, Wales is going to be ours, then they could have actually secured more MEPs. Where it has worked was in the summer in the Brecon and Radnorshire by-election, where it was a Conservative MP, Chris Davies, who obviously faced a recall petition and had to stand down, and then the Liberal Democrats managed to take it because the Greens and Plaid Cymru said they'd stand by the wayside. So where we have now is we've had the Green Party have come up with 9 seats that they are going to contest, including Brighton Pavilion, obviously, because that is Caroline Lucas's seat, and they're also going to contest Exeter, which is Ben Bradshaw, the Labour MP's seat, and of course there has been some consternation from Labour MPs saying, well, hang on a moment, Ben Bradshaw has Remain credentials and has said that he wants to campaign for a second referendum, and has been a campaigner for a second referendum, and therefore if you are going after Ben Bradshaw, then that isn't fair. Liberal Democrats are going to contest Bath, Bermondsey and Old Southwark, that was is now a Labour seat, previously a Liberal Democrat seat. Esher and Walton.
Dominic Raab.
Dominic Raab, yes. Finchley and Golders Green is Mike Freer. And then we've got going into, I'm trying to think of other ones. South Cambridgeshire that will be Heidi Allen's seat. Former Conservative, and Twickenham obviously is Vince Cable's.
How would they have selected these seats?
So in large part, and I've just briefly been through who's currently sitting, so it's based on who's got the seats. So Caroline Lucas obviously is the sitting MP down in Brighton Pavilion, so it's based on the fact who's got the seat currently, and then who in the last election did best. Is there clear water between which party has the best foothold in that particular seat? And that's the broad way they've done it up. But the hope is, from that point of view, from this Remain Alliance's point of view, is that they have one candidate going and their votes aren't split, and that gives the best chance of defeating either the Conservatives or the Labour Party. But it is more complicated than it appears on first blush, because, of course, people like Ben Bradshaw are saying they are Remainers, and there are also...
well, it's the party versus... So it's not... Yes, I understand what you're saying. It's complex and nuanced.
Yes, it is.
It'll never catch on.
No.
Interesting stuff, though.
Yeah, Sure. Oh, one other very small piece of information. Parliament is going to return on Tuesday, the 17th of December, after the general election.
Right.
And
break up on...
And they haven't yet said when it breaks up, but that gives 5 working days, because, of course, MPs have to be sworn in, 4 to 5 working days to possibly debate Brexit legislation, should the Conservatives, and it is a should, the Conservatives secure a majority, and they could sit to Christmas Eve, possibly, and that gives, 5 working days to pass Brexit legislation for a New Year's Eve Brexit, should that be how the country votes.
Splendid stuff.
That's it.
All I want for Christmas?
It's Mystery Hour.
My 2 front teeth. It's coming up to 12 noon. I've got a very, very interesting text here, which I shall try to read before the music overtakes me. James, first, some full disclosure up front. I'm a Labour Party member and of Jewish heritage. So while I do not think that Corbyn is anti-Semitic, I actually don't think it's prima facie irrational to be Jewish and anxious about Corbyn. If you are a Pole, you feared Leave winning the referendum because it emboldened people who don't like Poles, because it seemed like the Leave campaign didn't take confronting xenophobia seriously. That's the understatement of the century. If you think Corbyn has deliberately or otherwise emboldened or not taken seriously anti-Semitic elements within the Labour Party, it's rational to think anti-Semites might feel emboldened if Corbyn wins an election. I can't read the rest of the text because it's too long, but that's a really helpful contribution. Thank you.